Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning and welcome back. Welcome to day 2 of our Global Policy Dialogue. As soon as everyone takes their seats, we will be able to begin. We have 3 wonderful panels today, a full day, and we would love to get started. So please take your seats and we'll begin. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Kindly requesting for your attention, please, and also kindly requesting for those that are coming in through the doors to kindly please find their seats so that we may begin with this morning's panel discussion. Thank you so much for indulging me. Good morning once again and welcome to this special session that is really going to be tapping into the youth perspective. My name is Nozipho Mbanjwa from CNBC Africa, up from Johannesburg, so it's quite an honor and a pleasure to be here again on the second day with you. Before we go further, I'm going to kindly remind you that even if you are going to be listening in English, maybe it is a good idea to use your headphones, because I do understand that the projection towards the back of the room might be a bit of a challenge. So I'm going to put my headphones on as well, and I would encourage you to do the same so that we've got great audibility throughout the day. Thank you very much for that. Now, this particular session is going to focus on getting a better understanding on how the youth of today see the future of work and how they will contribute to shaping the future we want. And we start off this conversation with a collective understanding that the young people that are not only seated on either side of me, but the young people that are participating in this conversation via social media and other channels and all around the world are the future drivers of our economies. Young people are the future drivers of our societies. And in fact, we're talking to and hearing from the generation that is going to serve as stewards of our planet going forward. I don't think there's any doubt that the young people whose voices we're capturing today also represent the future leaders that are going to be leading our institutions, that are going to be leading our organizations. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to have a meaningful conversation, an authentic conversation about the future, well, we have to make sure that we not only capture the voices of young people, but we certainly amplify their voices in these sorts of discussions. And so this particular panel is going to give us an opportunity to better understand the youth perspective with regards to the opportunities and to the challenges that they encounter as they transition into the world of work today. And through their reflections, we might be able to surface insights around how do we then shape the organization of work going forward. In addition to this, we're going to draw back into some of the conversations that we had yesterday, where there was a very significant theme around ensuring that the voices of young people are brought to bear. So we'll allow them to reflect on some of the big ideas that came through some of yesterday's conversations, and we'll certainly then also project their voices into some of the later panel discussions that we're going to have as we wrap up these series of dialogues today. So the voice voice of young people is going to be integrated across the conversations and the themes that we would be having over these 2 days that we've been here. For those of you who have only joined us today, I'm also just going to quickly bring you up to speed in terms of how we're going to be using the technology that is at our disposal to ensure that your voices and your insights and your questions are captured in the discussions this morning. So what you will see is that I will introduce my panelists shortly. Unlike yesterday, we don't necessarily have discussants or respondents in this particular panel, but we have 4 young people with very personal experiences as well as meaningful positions in the work that they do today that they can bring to bear some interesting contributions, and I will introduce them shortly. I will also be using a poll at some point in the conversation just to temperature check whether we are on the same page in terms of the 40 to 50-year-old, and I say that in relation to what the conversation from yesterday, to see if the 40 and 50-year-olds are on the same page as the 20-something and early 30-somethings that are sitting on stage here today. And that should open up an opportunities for further conversations. We will be taking questions from the floor, and we'll get to that in the conversation, but we'll also be taking questions from Slido. Now, if you weren't here yesterday, all you need to do is get onto your mobile phone or your tablet and go to www.slido.com. You will be required to put in a passcode. It is projected on the screens on either side, and it is ILOFOW. ILOFOW, that's what you need to put in. And what you will see then is a screen that allows you to type in a question that you would like us to bring into the conversation. You will also note that there's a very small like icon, very similar to the like icon that you see on Facebook, and you can like other people's questions, and what that does is that it bumps up the question right to the top of the queue, and we are able to then take the questions that have the highest resonance with the audience into the conversation. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, this is a youth panel, so we are expecting a significant increase in the social media interaction as well. So we have a live streaming capability, and so we know that there are audiences outside of these 4 walls who are bringing in their voices into the conversation. For those live audiences, please just remember that the hashtag, once again, is ILOFOW for Twitter if you want to follow the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's anybody in the room who is having a bit of difficulty in terms of logging on and getting onto the slide or website, please just raise your hands. There are team members here, a part of the ILO, who are more than happy to come and assist you, and there are roaming. So if there is anybody who is having any difficulty at any point before we start, please just make sure that you raise your hand and we can be able to do that. And that's really the logistics of the conversation. So at this point, I'd really like to get into it and begin to introduce our panelists that have joined me up here. So I'm going to start off on my right. I'm joined by Ammin Youssouf. Ammin is the founder and the CEO of Afrobytes. And next to Ammin is Clémentine Moyart. She's a policy officer for the European Youth Forum. And on my left, I'm joined by Thiébaut Weber. He is the Confederal Secretary for the European Trade Confederation. And on the far end, we're joined by Salonie. She's a junior researcher in the research department here at the ILO. A very big welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. Now, I really wanted to maybe start off with just getting a sense of your experience of the world of work thus far, so that we then begin to take the conversation forward. So Clémentine, I'm going to start off with you. Give us a sense of how many jobs have you had to date, and if you could describe your experience of the world of work, what would those descriptors be?
Well, I think I'm quite lucky, actually, because during the last 6 years, I only had like 3 jobs, which actually I think is not a lot for like the young generation, and maybe I'm already not that young anymore because I'm almost like 30. And I think, I mean, we are not very young. And I think like things are evolving like really, really fast, and they have been evolving for the last 10 years, like really fast regarding digitalization, for instance. But regarding my experience of work, I think I'm really happy because what is important for my work is that I work for something I believe in, that I work for an organization that has values I believe in, and I think I'm really lucky for this because this is not the thing for the majority of young people now, that quality employment would be like the first objective for their job. We talked yesterday about, is there any survey that exists for young people regarding what young people like, what is the kind of jobs they would like to have? I would really encourage you to check. There is a survey called Generation What, WHAT, where they speak about what do young people think about education, about work. And here you can see that for like most of young people, the thing they worry the most about is their job today, is getting a job today. And I think this is part of the problem as well, is that actually getting a job is something that young people worry about, and they don't have like the chance to have a job that, just to try to look for a job that they really like, actually.
And you've raised a couple of important points. The first one, of course, is that you've only, and using your words, only had 3 jobs in 6 years, which already gives us the indication that for many young people, it's quite a number of jobs in the earlier years before they get to the stable job in inverted commas. And we'll explore why that is the norm. And I'm also interested to understand a little bit later for you, Clémentine, is that once we've gotten over the concern of getting a job, what are the fresh concerns about what helps us to keep a job and fulfills us in that job? But, I mean, let me bring you into the conversation here. You've leapfrogged to, as an entrepreneur, doing amazing things in terms of connecting entrepreneurs in Africa and connecting entrepreneurs in Europe. I'm really fascinated in understanding how that transition came about for you, and why not the traditional route of actually working for any of the big organizations in Africa or in Europe?
Alors, tout d'abord, j'aimerais expliquer que, d'abord, je suis très flatté d'être dans ce panel parce que je touche la quarantaine maintenant. Mais moi, j'ai commencé en fait en tant que salarié en 99. Et assez rapidement, je suis devenu entrepreneur à partir de 2002. Je suis devenu entrepreneur pour les mêmes raisons qui ont été dites précédemment, pour mon souci de la qualité de mon emploi. C'est-à-dire que je considère que l'emploi, au final, c'est de 9h du matin jusqu'à 18h. Et comme je voulais que cet emploi me plaise énormément, j'ai considéré que le mieux que j'avais à faire, c'était de le créer moi-même. Et donc, je suis entrepreneur depuis 2002. Et donc, aujourd'hui, j'en suis à ma 2e entreprise. Et j'essaie de la façonner au quotidien pour que, tout simplement, ce que je fasse au quotidien me plaise, que les soft skills, dont on parlera un peu plus tard, je puisse les exercer. Voilà ce qui est important pour moi. Et aujourd'hui, je suis dans le digital depuis toutes ces années. Le digital, vous le savez tous, a profondément changé les rapports au travail sous plein de formes. Aujourd'hui, je travaille notamment sur la question de l'Afrique. L'Afrique, aujourd'hui, on est à 1 milliard d'habitants, on sera à 2 milliards en 2050, ce qui veut dire qu'un homme sur 4 va vivre en Afrique. Et donc, des nouvelles formes de travail vont s'imposer sur ce continent-là. Donc, en fait, on parle de l'Afrique d'un homme sur 4, mais au final, pas simplement de l'Afrique, mais des pays émergents. C'est-à-dire que tous les repères que l'on a, nous, en Occident, par rapport à notre rapport au travail, les agences pour l'emploi, etc., il y a de fortes chances qu'on ne passe pas par ces cases-là. Donc je trouve qu'il y a une réflexion très très importante à avoir sur ce sujet-là.
I mean, thank you very much. Again, a number of very important issues that you put on the table, and it's an interesting perspective to really begin to see a growing trend of young people choosing to go the entrepreneurial route in light of the bigger conversation that we're having about what the labor market is going to look like going into the future. And we'll come back and pick up on some of the salient points that you've raised there. Thiébaut, again, a very interesting and unique perspective that I'm expecting from you, because as a young person, I'm hoping that you're also still under 40, because it seems like our panel is getting not so young anymore. But as a young person who has had active experience in terms of being part of the labor movement, give me a sense of why would you actually even be attracted to the labor movement. There was a question that was raised yesterday about the need to coolify, the coolification of labor. So I would assume that you must have that sorted.
Oh, maybe because the challenge to coolify the labor movement is a great challenge, so that's why I'm interested and excited, but maybe and encouraged by that. No, just about our experience. I realized something very important by discussing with my father 2 weeks ago only. What is the difference between his youth and my own experience? He started in the 60s as a worker in the rubber industry. He was hired in 64 as a worker. He worked for 1 year, then he had the military service for 1 year. He came back for 6 months, and when he came back, he said, I would like to do volunteering in Chad, in Africa, for 2 years. Then he left the company for 2 years, and when he came back, he was working, he was hired again, or no, the contract was only suspended, and he worked, his place was insured, his position was insured in the same company, and I was like, I was not able to imagine that, to figure it out. I mean, it was something different. Today it's clear that the things are changed and it's not possible anymore, but he was that was in the 60s during a full employment period, where that reply to that, to my integration, to my surprise, was that even if the company would have said, you know, sorry, we have hired someone else, I could have find easily another job as a machine operator or somewhere else. Maybe not in the rubber industry, but maybe that was not a problem at that time. So it's clear that today I'm not, you know, I wouldn't say that I'm a symbol of a precarious worker or that my experience is precarious. I'm lucky that I have never been unemployed, for example, but it's clear that I tried a huge diversity of contract. I have been a temporary worker, an agency worker. I've been volunteer also for 2 years in my student union with €400 a month. I've tried a lot of experience, but it's clear that this kind of a linear experience that our parents knew, this is definitely the past.
So certainly we're moving away from a linear understanding and experience of work, and it'll be fascinating to find out what is the new pattern that is emerging. Salonie, let me bring you in, because one would assume that you are, you know, you're part of the ILO research department, and you also have a specific affinity for gender issues in the workplace, just looking at what you've studied and what you've written in the past. Bring us to the fore in terms of your experience, and how do you end up working at the ILO? What has that journey been like?
So I do work at the ILO, but anything I say is completely my own opinion, so you can't hold anybody here accountable.
That is a perfect disclaimer.
But I think I'm the youngest person on this panel, and it's the number of jobs I've had is in double digits. So I've worked in 5 internships. I've worked with a documentary filmmaker. I've worked in advertising. I work at the ILO now. So my experience has been very varied when it comes to work. But I would also like to acknowledge, when we speak of work, to speak of unpaid work, because it's easy to forget that that is also a form of work, and we do not give it the value that it needs to be given. So work for me is really important because it gives me a sense of purpose. I want to know that I wake up every day and I do something that contributes positively to society that I live in. And I'm not attaching a moral value to work, but personally for me it's important that I'm doing something that's substantial and it contributes towards achieving a gender-inclusive world. And in terms of unpaid work, I think it's really important to acknowledge it because it's easy to forget, but it kind of helps you reproduce your everyday life. You cannot get away with it. You really need to be able to, I've lost my chain of thought, but things like cooking my meals, cleaning my house, there are daily activities that require time, and it's work.
So again, you're touching on a lot of things that came out yesterday, but my eye is being drawn to one of the questions that's been on screen and already sitting with 42 votes. And I want to bring that question in because it links very much to what you've said, Salonie, but it also links to a big issue that was raised yesterday. And the question is, yesterday a speaker said that unpaid internships help young people getting to good jobs. But what about those who can't afford them? And I want to open up the can of unpaid internships to all of the young people on the panel. And starting off with you, Thiébaut, what we've heard from Salonie, a varied work experience, which has included 5 internships. I'm not necessarily saying that those internships have been unpaid, but we know that the practice of unpaid internships is real, and a lot of people have to contend with it. What are your views on that?
Again, to follow up on what, I'm 34, I have a daughter, she's 6, so I'm not sure I'm the young people anymore, but it's on that. Is it a demand of young people to be unpaid during their internship? I mean, that's a reality of the labor market, so they take it as a reality, because I think that it's not an issue about docility, but they try. Sorry.
Okay.
They adapt to the reality of the labor market and on unpaid internship, but this is not something they want. And I mean, Clémentine said it. Quality of work and something meaningful is important, and this is something on which young people will not give up. So no, unpaid internship is not like the opportunity, the best opportunity to get a job is kind of a new reality, is something that is fatal for young people, so they take it, but this is not a demand of young people.
So certainly something that young people don't want. Clémentine, your hand is up, wanting to jump into that conversation. What are your views?
From my perspective, one main issue with unpaid internship is really the issue of inequality. And we mentioned, and we discussed this yesterday on the panel, and we say, yeah, the unpaid internship is not like the most important problem in the world. And it's true, but it's part of having a coherent visions towards like encouraging young people and helping young people to access the labor market. And like, when we have unpaid internships, this is not equal opportunities for all young people to access the labor market. Of course, like during curricula, you can have some kind of internships, it can be part of your curricula, and it's quite different. But then after you finish your study, if you offer some unpaid internship, then young people do not have like the same possibilities. And when we see like with the multiplication of precarious contracts and temporary employment, then we have the same issue because we just like increase inequalities within like one generation, because in between like temporary employments, what happens? Young people like do not have access, for example, to unemployment benefits because they need very often to be able to contribute during like 12 months to like a system to be able to have access to unemployment benefits. So then the ones that were not the privileged one, like are not on an equal foot on the labor market.
So you're saying that it's literally actually deepening exclusions by ensuring that only those who can actually afford to be unpaid at a particular time are going to make use of those opportunities. I saw your hand and I'm going to bring you in now, Ammin, but I want to bring Nina's voice. And Nina is it's more of a comment and less of a question. And Nina's saying on the screen there, it's time to stop referring to young people as the future. They are the present too. And the reason why I'm pulling that, Ammin, and why I'm bringing it to you is that as a person who is in a position where you're possibly employing young people and also looking at the cost of labor, what are your views on unpaid internships? Isn't it so much easier to get young people who are passionate about technology, as your company works in the technological space, passionate about entrepreneurship, and are willing to do this for in inverted commas, the experience. And that, I think, is a reflection of a present practice. What are your views as a young person who's also an employer?
Alors, moi, personnellement, je suis totalement contre les stages non rémunérés. En 15 ans, je ne l'ai jamais fait. Et parce que je suis contre, je me suis tout simplement dit que la meilleure façon de montrer que j'étais contre, c'était de créer une entreprise et d'avoir une pratique moi-même qui fasse que je ne le fasse pas. Donc si on veut changer les choses, à un moment donné, il faut se mettre en position aussi de pouvoir les changer. La deuxième chose, un jeune qui vient... Alors, ce qui veut dire, par contre, que je me positionnais aussi sur l'idée que le jeune que je prends en stage, sur lequel je prends du temps, que je forme pendant 6 mois, ça me prend énormément de temps, c'est un jeune que je veux employer. C'est donc soit je ne le prends pas parce que ce n'est pas mon intention, soit je le prends et je fais vraiment le job jusqu'au bout, je lui fais faire un entretien. L'entretien est plutôt un entretien assez serré parce que je veux quelqu'un de motivé et employable à l'issue des 6 mois où je vais le former, donc c'est un vrai investissement. Donc l'idée de ne pas rémunérer cette personne ne me vient pas à l'esprit parce que je trouve ça tout simplement contre-productif. Ensuite, il y a un troisième point. Un jeune qui vient dans mon entreprise et qui accepte dès le début de vendre sa force de travail gratuitement veut dire qu'un jour, il va vendre mes produits gratuitement. Ça ne me dit rien. Donc, je préfère complètement un jeune qui vienne, qui défende son, comme on dit en français, son steak, qui défende vraiment sa position, qui soit en position de négociation, qui soit exigeant, parce que cette exigence qu'il porte dès le début, c'est une exigence dont je vais bénéficier ensuite. Voilà.
And sure, that is quite a significant and profound insight, and I think, again, that's going to filter into the conversations we have later on today. I'm very interested in us having a conversation that also looks forward and doesn't only look back at our reflections. And so I'm going to ask a single question that's going to be very brief across the panel, and the question is, if you could change your first experiences, because we've now understood that it's very plural and not linear, of work, what would you change of that experience? And that, I think, should give us an indication of what we would like to see in the future. And Salonie, I see your hand, so if you would want to weigh in on that, on that question and also to come in with your insight.
I'm trying to go back and link that to unpaid internships since we're speaking about that. I do think it's an exploitation and discrimination against young people when you don't pay your interns, because asking for a fair wage for your work is not being an entitled millennial. It's asking for a fair wage. And yet there are organizations that still don't pay their interns, and an internship is likely the only way I am going to be able to access these organizations. And if you don't pay your interns, not only does it contribute towards inequality, but it also makes me feel like my work is not valuable, and that is a problem.
So again, very strongly related to the point that Ammin makes. If you could change your first experiences of work, what is the one thing that you could change going forward?
I would like a female boss. I think we don't have enough women in leadership positions, and I'm not saying that we haven't made progress when it comes to including women in the workplace, but there is still a huge gap that needs to be closed. We were having this conversation at the ILO on International Women's Day, where even women who are in leadership positions are forced to take on masculine traits because masculinity is most associated with leadership. And bringing in more women into roles of power, into positions of power, is kind of us taking back femininity and making it cool, making it acceptable. So that is something I would like to change.
I would want a female boss. It's a very profound statement. Thiébaut, what would you change?
No, very briefly, it's not linked to my first job, but I would have tried to be a bit better at school.
Explain
This is not
that.
the reason why I'm trade unionist today, but it's clear that if I will change something, I will try to be a bit better at school, at least for my own empowerment also.
And when you say better at school, you're talking about just in terms of your own performance at school?
To be, yeah.
All right, so so we're also getting a little bit of
I will not develop on that because it's outside work itself, but yeah, to be a bit more serious, let's say.
A bit more serious, and again, it opens up the conversation around education and the preparation of young people, and we'll get that to that. I mean, you said that you started off as a wage worker. If you could change your first experiences of work, what would you change?
Écoutez, c'est une question très complexe en fait. Je pense que je ne modifierai rien. C'est-à-dire ce qui m'est arrivé de bien comme ce qui m'est arrivé de mal. Parce que quand il vous arrive aussi des difficultés, c'est ce qui fait votre personnalité, c'est ce qui vous rend aussi peut-être plus apte à en affronter d'autres. En tant que salarié, évidemment, en tant que jeune, évidemment, et aussi en tant qu'entrepreneur. L'échec est formateur. Les erreurs sont formatrices. Donc, je dirais que non, je ne changerai rien. Enfin, je me projette vers le futur, mais ce qui est passé, et je me sers de mes expériences en les regardant toujours, comme on dit en français, le verre à moitié plein. Toujours.
So again, embracing the moments of failure and taking them forward. Clémentine, if you could change anything in the past, what would it be?
I'm a bit like, I mean, I would not really change anything. I was quite happy, actually, and I think as young people, we also like sometimes this kind of flexibility. We are happy to have like different experiences as well. But then what I was missing is that this compensation, you know, to flexibility. Because, for example, I worked in different countries, but then, and I was really happy to do this, and I think young people in general are happy to go and work in other countries. But then, I mean, I have no idea about any kind of system I contributed, actually, for instance. And if I think of my pensions, I probably have like almost no pension for the moment, and I've been working for like almost 7 years now. And same, in what was complicated with different experiences was, I'm also a young mother, but when you go from like one experience of 1 year in a country and then 1 year in another country, and then you want like to have a kid and you're quite young and you're like, how can I do if I start with a 1-year contract and what if after 6 months I want to be pregnant? This is quite impossible as well. So it's more like what kind of compensation in terms of protection do we offer to this flexibility, which is fine. Flexibility can be fine if we offer some kind of protection for young people to move into like adulthood and to be accompanied into this as well.
Absolutely, and again, a very important point that we will get to. I do want to do a temperature check in the room and just to pull up a poll. And this is based on a conversation, again, that we had, we started having yesterday around what do young people think about as they transition into the world of work. So I do want to pull up that poll, and it's right up there now. So if you have your mobile phone or your iPad with you, please participate with me. The question is, what is the most important criterion for a young person entering the labor market? Now, before the young people respond, I would like to get a sense of what the audience actually thinks the answer is. So please go ahead and choose your option. The employer is reputable as a criterion. The job fits their experience, their perception of the quality of work experience that they're going to have in that place of work, and whether it is the promise of a good salary and benefits that helps them make that decision. So I'm quickly going to make my choice as well. And as we can see on the screen, we already have an overwhelming majority of the audience saying that it's actually the quality of work experience that my panelists would take into consideration as they choose the job that they're going to go into. I think that is, we're going to pause it right there. I am seeing that the lower levels are moving slowly, but not significantly. So let's reflect back on that and really get a sense of whether this resonates with you. Salonie, as you make your choice in terms of which job you're going to get into as you get into the labor market, was it really about the quality or the perceived quality of the experience of work that you thought you would get into that place, in that particular place?
The most important criteria for me entering the labor market would, yes, it would be quality of work experience. But personally, I have debt to pay back, which I cannot wish away. So a good salary and benefits would come a very close second.
So a good salary and benefits come a very close second to the quality of work experience because of the reality of debts that many young people, especially coming out of university, have to contend with. Thiébaut, how do you make sense of what you're seeing on the screen? Is it really about the quality of work experience?
I voted for that option, so
yes.
Indeed for me it is the case. And this is something on which is not only linked to work itself, but on the society, on our way to produce. I will not talk about young people, but it's clear that there is a big challenge for new generation to live in a quality environment, and work is part of this quality environment. If we continue to produce as it is today with an uncontrolled machine, we will have an uncontrolled machine that at the end will produce crap just to produce. So we should also think about this issue of quality on every part of our lives. And that, again, as I said on internship, this is something on which young people will not give up.
Quality of employment, and of course a big issue that came up yesterday. I am seeing that good salary and benefits, it's slowly creeping up, sitting at 22% now. But I mean, what do you see on that screen, and does that resonate with you?
Alors, c'est définitivement la qualité du travail. Alors, je vais donner des exemples de ce que j'ai fait, moi. J'ai créé une entreprise qui s'appelle Big Youth, et on a décidé, quand on a déménagé nos locaux, on a décidé d'être dans le centre de Paris. Pour ceux qui connaissent un peu Paris, c'était dans le 2e arrondissement. Alors on m'a dit, mais t'es fou, les loyers sont super chers, palali et palala. J'ai dit, ben non. Ce que je veux, moi, c'est que les gens qui travaillent chez moi fassent le moins de temps de trajet possible par jour. Je veux que ça ne prenne que 15 minutes à chacun de venir au bureau. Donc je pourrais aller en banlieue de Paris, mais il prendrait 1 heure, 1 heure et demie. Ce qui risque de s'impacter sur la fiche de paie. Parce qu'évidemment, ils vont me dire, bah oui, mais moi, derrière, j'ai des enfants, j'ai une nounou, j'ai tout ça, il faut que je fasse du trajet, donc il faut payer plus. Donc, en fait, le choix d'apporter de la qualité de vie aux gens que l'on emploie, on l'économise quelque part aussi sur d'autres critères, où est-ce que les gens sont plus engagés à travailler avec vous, parce que vous compensez. Donc vous ne regardez pas simplement le prix au mètre carré de vos bureaux, mais vous regardez le fait que la personne n'est pas débauchable parce qu'elle n'ira pas travailler chez un autre employeur qui lui proposerait peut-être beaucoup plus que vous, parce que c'est tout simplement loin. Première chose, donc la qualité de vie de vos employés est fondamentale dans la rentabilité de votre activité. Le deuxième point, la qualité du travail et de l'expérience. Alors, j'étais un employeur assez atypique. Je ne regardais pas les CV des gens que j'employais. Je leur demandais, ok, si tu es là, c'est qu'a priori, tu dois être là parce que tu codes bien, tu sais faire du design, etc. Bon, ça c'est ok. Maintenant, moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est ce que tu fais hors de ton travail. Moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est ce que tu fais, c'est tout ce que tu fais qu'on ne te demande pas de faire, comme un robot. Moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est tout ce qui te plaît, tout ce qui fait que ça te motive. Et lorsque je voyais ces gens-là, je leur disais, écoute, voilà, des développeurs, hein, c'était mon secteur, je leur disais, sur quel langage est-ce que tu aimerais développer, tu as 25 ans, qu'est-ce que tu aimerais faire maintenant, etc. Et je leur disais, dis-moi ce que tu veux faire. Moi, mon job, c'est de trouver les clients pour que tu fasses ce que tu veux faire. Par contre, le deal, il est clair. Je t'apporte ce qui va te permettre d'augmenter tes capacités, d'être plus bankable sur le marché, mais toi, tu me garantis que le travail que tu vas faire sera le meilleur possible. Je ne veux pas être deuxième, je veux être premier. Donc moi, je fais ma part du travail qui consiste à t'apporter ce que tu souhaites faire, et toi, ta part, c'est de faire vraiment ce travail, mais le mieux possible. Et ça a fonctionné assez bien, en fait.
So again, already lessons on how to get the most out of millennials. And that brings me to you, Clémentine. Quality of work experience as the overwhelming outcome. How does that sit with you?
Well, for me personally, I mean, of course, the quality would be like the most important, and it's really important, I think, to see the result, especially now that sometimes we hear the tendency to say that for young people, any job is better than no job at all, and this is really something I think we have to fight against, this like misconception. But I think one of my answers would also not be in this poll, which is not so much like when I enter the labor market, what I would like to have today is the possibility to reskill and to retrain. And this is a bit linked to what has been said already. We've been like, we will have to do like many different jobs, and we know this, you know? So I think we need to like invest in, we mentioned already yesterday, like lifelong learning and the possibility to be able to retrain. And this is a bit like worried when we see today like the kind of investment that we make into like education, for instance. As Nina said, I think young people is not just the future, it's like young people is also about today. It's also about investing in young people today. So if young people is important, let's invest in them today, let's invest into education, and let's invest into like possibility for them to retrain and like have this possibility to go from one job to another job.
So the issue of education, I'm going to come to that, but I'm going to quickly go to the floor and take two questions from the floor. But before we go to the floor, I just want to stress test something with you, Salonie. You spoke at the beginning about wanting to really having the employer and what the employer stands for as being important to you. If we look at the outcome of this poll, only 9% of the audience thinks that having a reputable employer is going to be an important consideration for a young person. Do you think what the employer stands for is increasingly becoming non-significant relative to other factors?
I don't think that's true for me personally. I think that I've invested a lot in my education and into making sure that what I do is closely related to what I want to do. So the employer does really matter. What the organization works for matters to me. But I mean, I may be living in a bubble and I may not be representative.
So what the organization stands for matters, but when it comes to hard decisions about what it is that it's not going to be the most important consideration. Let me take a question. I'm seeing hands from the front saying, go to the screen, go to the screen. So there is an important question there, and it's really actually maybe it's a comment about the homogeneous nature or perceived homogeneous nature of young people. So we're sitting here on the panel, and again, and the assumption is a representation of young people, and yet Dennis is saying, wait, hold on. Can we really speak about youth as a homogeneous group? Aren't there many differences between them? Differences between the skilled and the non-skilled, the North and the South, blue collar versus white collar. Again, bringing the question of homogeneity to the fore. I mean, I'm going to throw this at you first. You are straddling in terms of the way your business is structured, 2 continents as a starting point. Are young people mistakenly perceived to be a homogeneous group?
Oui, les jeunes, il y a une multiplicité de jeunes, une multiplicité de jeunes, nord, sud, urbain, non urbain. Leurs aspirations sont différentes. Je dirais que si je devais quand même donner une division, histoire je dirais qu'il y a des jeunes qui s'inscrivent dans ce qu'on appelle la mondialisation, donc qui maîtrisent tous ces codes, l'information, qui sont aussi à l'aise à Paris qu'à Genève ou à New York. Et puis il y a des jeunes qui sont un peu plus sédentarisés, qu'on retrouve par exemple voilà, dans les campagnes en France, dans les secondes villes, tout ça, qui n'ont peut-être pas ces possibilités-là et qui n'ont pas forcément cette ouverture sur le monde. Aujourd'hui, je dirais que si je devais catégoriser, je dirais que je catégoriserais en ces 2 blocs-là. Mais dans ces 2 blocs-là, il y a une multiplicité de cas ensuite. Et puis ensuite, il y a... et dans ce cadre-là, un jeune à Lagos Et un jeune à Londres, s'il a accès à l'information, aux technologies, il fait partie de la classe moyenne, il y a parfois plus de similarités entre certains jeunes entre Lagos et Londres qu'entre Londres et un quartier à quelques kilomètres en fait. Donc je ne pense pas que l'homogénéité soit spatiale, je pense que c'est plutôt dans l'expérience. Vraiment. Voilà, je sais pas si c'est...
And so you're bringing to the fore that there's, in addition to these differences that Dennis has raised, there are geographic differences. We need to look at the urban-rural divide and so on. So we'll get to, again, to some of those issues, but I do want to bring in the question from Ambassador Bibolo Bunda from Gabon. And Madame, let me give you an opportunity to table your question to the panelists.
Je vous remercie, Madame la modératrice. Je voudrais tout d'abord féliciter le BIT pour l'organisation de cette importante rencontre et féliciter les panélistes pour leur brillante intervention. C'est en effet avec un intérêt tout à fait particulier que j'ai suivi leurs interventions et lesquelles ont mis en relief leur vision en tant que jeunes sur le travail de demain et un certain nombre d'orientations sur l'avenir du travail. J'ai une question, mais en fait, j'ai quelques éléments de réponse déjà à travers leurs interventions, mais je vais quand même la poser. Ma question est donc la suivante. Compte tenu du contraste existant entre les conditions de travail en Europe et celles en Afrique, où l'on souhaite voir l'amélioration des dites conditions, dans quel domaine spécifique souhaiteriez-vous voir le BIT et ses mandants africains poursuivre leur coopération de manière à ce que les politiques économiques et sociales élaborées par les gouvernements puissent davantage prendre en compte les préoccupations de la jeunesse africaine pour mieux faire face au travail de demain? Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Madame. And again, a beautiful question that links in with this issue of homogeneity that you're speaking about. Salonie, let me get your views on this. And again, responding to Ambassador Bunda, the differences between African and European youth, and of course, we could probably say the differences of young people around the world. What do you think the ILO should do better? And again, understanding that you're not speaking on behalf of the ILO, but what do you think the ILO can do better to better support the social economic agenda in terms of those differences?
What I would like to see more from the ILO in terms of including young people in the future of work is to bring a gender lens into knowledge production. And I want to be able to go into a world where my sexual orientation or gender identity is not a criteria for me getting hired, getting promoted, what kind of wage I get, what kind of field assignments I'm sent to, where equal pay for work of equal value is a reality. It's not just like a convention on paper. So essentially what I want to say is that I want the ILO to push more for gender inclusivity in the workplace.
So again, bringing in a very strong gender perspective, Salonie. But Thiébaut, I know this might put you in a precarious position because we're saying, for a second, step out of the lens and your reality of being in the European context. And maybe respond to the question that the ambassador has put and say, what can the ILO do differently or do better if we're really going to have an authentic address of the issues that young people in Africa are actually faced with?
It's clear that it's a difficult question for me because even in our debate, but maybe Ammin can speak about that, but in our debate it is a lot European-centered. About the reality of young people. So the question should be asked also to young people from Africa themselves, and unfortunately I don't see so much young people from Africa in the room that could reply. So the reality of our institution, not only ILO, I mean, should be that we should, on these specific issues like the future of work, to make sure that we are, I mean, the centenary process will be long, so there will be other steps or other conference like that. We should make sure that this is not European or classical, the old classical countries
Is there
centered.
anything that you could do outside of the ILO to create greater connection and cross-pollination between the European perspective and how European youth are supported and young people from Africa are supported?
The thing is that I discovered by being elected as a Confederate Secretary at the European level for the trade union, sorry, I'm not from the trade organization, but the trade union, so workers, that we have a lot of exchange with people from Africa, with people from China, with people from different countries. So it's not like a closed European world, but we have the opportunity to discuss. And even if our realities are diverse, like, I mean, young people are diverse, people in the world are diverse, we are sharing a lot of concerns on what does work mean. And the thing is that everywhere in the world, work is still meaningful. And that is important for the future of work. So we should take that global perspective on work and make sure it is that everybody contributes to it.
Absolutely, and again, I think what you raise, and I'm going to move on from this point, but I do want to give you a quick opportunity to weigh in on it. I mean, we talk about young people not being homogenous, but even if you go to the African continent, we're looking at 54 different countries, rural-urban divides, as you've said. Even there, it's what would support for young people in Africa look like from the ILO or any other institution when we're dealing with such a diverse group of young African people?
Alors, évidemment, il y a 54 pays, donc le Nigeria, le Mali, c'est d'abord physiquement extrêmement loin, donc c'est important de souligner la taille de ce continent qui est exceptionnel. Et puis, il y a quelque chose de très intéressant. L'histoire, parfois, avec un grand H, nous joue quelques tours. On a souvent opposé en Afrique le travail formel et le travail informel. On a un secteur informel énorme en Afrique, énorme. Dans certains pays, c'est en pourcentage de PIB, c'est absolument gigantesque. Et puis il s'avère que aujourd'hui, en Europe, en Occident, le travail s'est fragmenté. Vous pouvez le matin travailler pour Uber, l'après-midi être livreur pour Deliveroo. Vous pouvez éventuellement être travailleur à la maison pour je ne sais quel site internet. Donc vous pouvez techniquement aujourd'hui avoir 3, 4, 5 emplois dans une même journée en Europe. C'est ce que j'appelle, moi, de mon point de vue, de l'économie informelle avec des applications. C'est tout. Donc aujourd'hui, est-ce que au niveau du BIT, parce qu'on a une économie informelle, donc est-ce qu'on doit avoir une réflexion en prenant acte que c'est l'état de notre économie et comment on va utiliser maintenant la nouvelle économie pour se dire, bon bah, est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, il faut qu'on augmente la productivité? Comment on se sert des nouvelles technologies pour ramener des gens qui sont dans l'informel vers le formel? Comment on se sert de la technologie pour justement doter ces gens qui sont dans l'informel d'applications pour qu'on puisse suivre et éventuellement mettre de la fiscalité en place? Donc il y a une vraie réflexion, une vraie prospective à avoir sur ce qu'on désignait avant comme une faiblesse du continent africain. Ça se trouve, ça va se rééquilibrer parce qu'aujourd'hui, moi, ce que je constate, c'est qu'en Occident, de plus en plus, vous avez 4 à 5 jobs, vous livrez en bicyclette, vous conduisez une voiture, et tout ça dans une même journée. On a parlé tout à l'heure de la multiplicité des emplois que l'on a. Vous avez parlé de 10. Aujourd'hui, vous avez des gens qui ont plusieurs jobs dans une journée. Vraiment. Donc, il y a une... Je pense qu'il y a un virage qui est en train de se passer. L'Afrique fait des sauts quantiques. Je vais par exemple donner un exemple pour bien que l'on comprenne ce que je veux dire là. On a été très performant, par exemple, sur la mobile money. On a été très performant parce qu'on n'avait pas de réseau bancaire. Donc on est passé directement au paiement avec des téléphones, ce qu'on fait absolument quasiment pas ici. Et je pense que ce succès qu'on a eu sur la téléphonie mobile et sur le mobile payment, on devrait l'appliquer à tous les secteurs, en se disant comment les faiblesses structurelles que l'on a, comment maintenant on les transforme en atouts, en se disant voilà, ça va nous forcer à innover. innover dans l'éducation, dans le marché du travail. Donc il y a l'OBIT, pour moi, doit aujourd'hui regarder le monde tel qu'il est, se connecter avec ces startups, ces entrepreneurs, ces gens, ces jeunes en Afrique que l'on trouve dans les tech hubs qui essaient de réinventer l'Afrique, qui innove parfois dans des conditions où ils doivent créer des startups. Imaginez-vous créer une startup quand vous n'avez pas d'électricité. Il faut être particulièrement inventif. Donc on a cette inventivité-là, on a tout ça, et maintenant, voilà, il faut que des organisations comme les vôtres puissent accompagner ça. Parce que ça peut être créateur de valeur.
Again, a very, very insightful contribution. Clémentine, I want to move forward with you and not get you to weigh in on the same question. And I actually want you to respond to Kamelihle Sibanda, who's posted a question that links to an earlier point that you raised about education. And what Kamelihle is saying is, what kind of education would best prepare the youth for the future of work? What are your views on that, Clémentine?
Well, on this, I would really defend the concept of inclusive education, which is really like an education that is really focused on the learner, on the person that is learning. So this includes, for example, the lifelong learning approach, as I mentioned. But actually, I would also very support the point of Ammin, who is saying that what we learn outside formal education is also essential. So I would call this non-formal education, but we need to recognize the skills that young people are having and getting in different kind of system in different organizations through volunteering. This is also crucial because it's a kind of general skill that can also help you to adapt, and because we will have to go from one job to another, this is a kind of general skill that is really useful to be able to adapt very quickly to different situations.
So it's a question of adaptability and agility to different contexts. Yes.
And this is also a big challenge for on the workplace, because there is also informal education in the workplace, and the challenge to recognize the skills that people get in their work experience, in particular for workers that consider that they have no or very low level of skills, it's something that is a big challenge. So education, I don't know about the kind of education. I mean, we should use the all kind of tools in education to make sure that education is still a priority, and it depends of the sector you are working in, it depends of a lot of issues, but it's clear that education will still be a priority. There is no question about will the future of work change the role that education should play.
But as an extension of that, Salonie, one of the views that came through yesterday was that we're possibly still seeing an education system that is designed to produce workers that are going to go into the labor market. But if we're saying that because of technology that the labor market is likely going to shrink, what then should the education system look like, and what are then the critical skills that are going to be still important for those people who remain in the workplace and continue to work irrespective of the technological change that comes through?
I think we're talking about soft skills, perhaps, and one of the things that I can think of is communication, and how it's vital for young people, for everybody, not just young people, to have to be able to communicate well. And personally, when I think of working in an international organization like the ILO, networking is huge. So I have to be able to convince somebody in one conversation why I'm perfect for the job. And most of the people here are possibly at the receiving end of networking, but I assure you it's really difficult to be in our shoes also. And I'm also thinking of going back to the homogeneous group of people. Young people is not a homogeneous group, so communication with respect to, say, somebody selling flowers in a beach in Madras, and where competition is high, this flower seller has to be able to convince her customer or their customer that they need to come to her. So she needs to be able to, that's a form of networking or communication. So one of the soft skills that needs to be developed, I guess, or stressed upon more is communication.
So soft skills as a key instrument moving forward. I mean, would you add to that in terms of the kind of skills that are going to be important to be able to participate in the labor market in the future?
Alors, pour moi, la compétence clé, on parle d'un monde qui va extrêmement vite, où il faut être agile, très agile. Je prends par exemple le cas de Kodak, qui était une super boîte, mais qui s'est effondrée, de Nokia, qui était une entreprise de technologie en plus, qui s'est effondrée assez rapidement. Le contexte concurrentiel est devenu extrêmement violent pour les entreprises, pour les organisations. Ça, c'est un point. À partir de là, et ça c'est mon avis personnel, moi ce dont j'ai besoin, c'est qu'on ne forme pas des travailleurs moulés dans une idée, j'ai besoin que l'on forme des innovateurs. J'ai besoin de gens qui sont capables de challenger une organisation, qui sont capables de la changer, qui sont capables de venir me voir et me dire « mais en fait, tu te trompes. Il ne faut pas faire ça. Il faut qu'on change. » On n'a pas besoin de gens qui vont être on dit en français des bénis oui-oui, qui vont dire oui à tout. On a besoin de gens qui soient en capacité de changer l'entreprise, des gens capables de changer eux-mêmes extrêmement vite. Donc on a besoin, je dirais que personnellement, je n'ai pas besoin de gens qui savent faire, j'ai besoin de gens qui savent être. Qui savent être parce que le faire, on l'apprend, mais le être, c'est plus compliqué, en fait. Donc des gens qui savent être, c'est des gens que je vais pouvoir assez rapidement voir et dire, écoute, il s'avère que le contexte a changé, donc d'ici 2 mois, la boîte, toute la boîte, moi, jusqu'au stagiaire, notre métier sera différent. Et je veux une personne qui soit capable de me dire, bah, écoute, bah, pas de problème, on change. Voilà.
I want to actually just continue a little bit more on that line of thought, but we're going to go to Twitter in a short while, because as we know, there's a lot of young people that are on social media platforms and they are contributing to this conversation. But as we pull that up, just a quick one, I mean, just to go back to that point, how then should organizations adapt if they're going to create a culture that allows people to be instead of focusing on the doing?
Alors, sur le savoir-être, par exemple, je vais vous donner une anecdote. On a en France des stages, on appelle ça des stages de collégiens. C'est des stages qui durent une semaine où vous accueillez un jeune de 14 ou 15 ans dans votre entreprise parce qu'il découvre votre entreprise. Il s'avère que moi, j'avais une agence de communication digitale et j'avais des jeunes qui étaient entre 25 et 35 ans. Et donc, c'était toujours, oh, le stagiaire de 15 ans et tout, il va venir pendant une semaine, il faut s'en occuper, etc. Ça va être pénible. J'ai dit, non. Ce qui va se passer, c'est que ce jeune de 15 ans, il va travailler pendant une semaine, je vais m'en occuper personnellement et je vais vous démontrer qu'il a beaucoup à vous apporter. À la fin de sa semaine, il va vous faire une présentation. On appelait ça une keynote. Et la mission que j'ai demandé à ce jeune-là, c'est, écoute, moi, j'ai bientôt 40 ans, donc je ne sais pas, je ne connais pas les usages des jeunes de 13 à 15 ans. Je ne suis pas assez vieux pour avoir un enfant de cet âge-là. Je suis trop vieux pour avoir un petit frère ou une petite sœur de cet âge-là. Il s'avère que dans mon entreprise, c'est pareil. Ces gens entre 25 et 35 ans, ils sont un peu dans cette situation-là. Donc on a une sorte de trou où on ne sait pas quels sont les comportements et les usages des jeunes de 10 à 15 ans. Est-ce que tu peux demander à tes amis j'ai envie de savoir, est-ce qu'ils utilisent Facebook ou pas? Est-ce qu'ils utilisent Twitter ou pas? Donc, elle nous a fait une présentation à la fin de la semaine et elle nous a dit, non, mais Facebook, on n'utilise pas ça. Donc, on a eu des insights de jeunes qui nous ont expliqué qu'ils ne regardaient pas les mêmes programmes TV que nous, qui n'utilisaient pas les mêmes réseaux sociaux que nous, et ça a été absolument formidable. Donc, il faut laisser la chance aux jeunes de s'exprimer parce qu'on en apprend énormément, en fait.
So a very deliberate way of ensuring that the voice of young people is integrated into the business and how the business strategizes going forward. So I do want to go to social media, and one of the tweets that has come through, and it's projected on your screen now, and it comes from Renew Business, and it says, what is learned outside formal education must be recognized as crucial and vital for adaptability and agility. And I think this goes back to the point that you raised earlier, Thiébaut, that we have to start recognizing what is learned outside of formal education. If you could quickly just add another comment to Renew Business, what would you say? How do we go about doing that? I think that's the key question. How do you begin? What needs to change for what is learned outside to be more recognized?
This is where classical form of representation of workers, like we are, trade unions, as a future. For me, I'm convinced that the specific point of education and training is not of the unique one, but is the best example we have that we will still need workers' representation for social rights. Because training rights are, in our opinion, social rights, in a way that whatever the company will look like in the future, whatever work will look like in the future, people will need the opportunity for their skills to be recognized and to have access, effective access, not only training rights. Training rights in one pillar, the other pillar is to ensure effective access. Because if we don't deal with the issue of effective access to training, then we will have the same usual suspects, the skilled one, that will know how to make their way in this world, and the other one that will not have access to training. So, and on the workplace, in the sectors, at every level, I think that trade unions and employer organization are the best placed on the labor market to implement the relevant training policies,
right,
based on workers' needs and on company needs. And you can find the right balance to make sure that people are still trained and empowered as individual and a group of workers.
There was a question that was beamed up, and I'm not seeing it on my screen, but I'm seeing it on the big screen, and it maybe challenges the conversation we've been having about education. It's a question from Alex Paling, and Alex is saying, is there something to be learned from homeschooling and those who follow an unschooling approach in education? What are the views around an unschooling approach in education, so alternatives to the traditional model or the dominant model of the schooling system? Salonie, do you have views on this?
I think that this is something that needs to be explored, but Alex raises a really good point. I have a very close friend of mine who was homeschooled, and no, I personally think, yes, we should put some more thought into this.
So there's a need to perhaps to continue exploring the unschooling approach, but I'd like to bring that point that you've raised, Salonie, and link it with Mthunzi Mdwaba's point that is projected on screen again. And I'm seeing the tail end of it, but from the gist of what I'm getting at Clémentine is that if we're going to look at vocational training and artisan skills for the present as well as into the future, how do we get these to be cool again? And how do we broaden the options, I think generally is the question, around the education journey that leads to the labor market. And thereafter we'll go back to Twitter, because there's a very important Twitter question that's come through around youth unemployment and where that sits in this conversation. But what are your views on this, Clémentine?
I mean, I really believe that vocational training is really important and it can be one of the solutions. And I mean, I know more about the European level, and now this is something that is really used and really put forward at the European level to say that this is one of the solutions to put in touch like education and the professional world. But here I think we need to be quite careful as well, because one system from one country cannot just be like exported to another country. The industries are not the same, the culture of working are not the same either, so we have to be quite careful. And if we want to make it attractive, I think we need to make it quite careful. And here the quality of the apprenticeship that we would offer is also important. I myself, for instance, really pushed, I have a little brother who is like 20 years old, and I really pushed him to go into apprenticeship. And because I think this is one of the solutions, and because I think the world of work and the world of education are not linked enough. But he almost, he has almost been into like a kind of burnout because of what was asked was like really a lot. It was almost as much as what was asked in a job. Because I think we are developing more and more apprenticeship, but we need also to regulate it in a way that we make sure that this is really a path and a bridge to the labor market. And this is not just like a normal job. This is really to accompany the young people and then to help them to develop some skills. So we have to be careful about this, I think.
So a note of caution there from Clémentine. I'd like for you, Ammin, to respond to that. Clémentine is cautious about how do we protect those in vocational training. But in some markets, and maybe drawing from my own experience in South Africa, young people don't want to go into vocational training because they don't see it as important or as recognized as going to a traditional university. So how do we change the mindset of employers, essentially, in terms of how they value vocational trained workers versus those that have a traditional qualification from a university?
Alors, oui, c'est un vaste débat en soi. Faut que la formation professionnelle soit en adéquation avec les besoins du marché, mais je suis un peu gêné parce que j'aime pas trop cette idée que l'université, que la formation soit calquée sur les besoins de l'entreprise, parce que l'entreprise a besoin de s'enrichir. Moi, j'ai employé des gens qui étaient très bons qui avaient fait des facs d'histoire dans la tech, parce que j'ai besoin d'avoir quelqu'un qui soit capable de parler avec un client. Que ce ne soit pas un codeur, mais que ce soit quelqu'un qui soit capable d'avoir des relations humaines, tout simplement. Alors, je vais quand même faire une petite boucle sur un point important, et je vais revenir à l'Afrique, parce qu'on a parlé d'éducation. On sait, on est un peu plus de 1 milliard en Afrique aujourd'hui, on sera 2 milliards en 2050, avec la population la plus jeune. En 2050, il faut savoir qu'un enfant sur 10 qui naîtra sur Terre va naître au Nigeria. C'est absolument gigantesque. Ce qui veut dire qu'en gros, même avec les capacités techniques que l'on a aujourd'hui, on est incapable de construire autant d'écoles que de jeunes qui vont arriver à éduquer. C'est physiquement impossible. C'est même pas la peine de penser à ça, ce n'est pas possible. C'est-à-dire qu'une école, ce n'est pas que 4 murs et un toit. Une école, c'est 4 murs, un toit, un professeur, des tables et surtout une route pour aller à cette école-là. Donc au rythme de la démographie africaine, c'est impossible. Donc il faut réinventer l'école, il faut réinventer tout. Il faut, on parlait d'éducation à distance. Aujourd'hui, les MOOC fonctionnent extrêmement bien. En Afrique, il y a une vraie demande. Donc comment on va... Aujourd'hui, je n'ai pas de réponse. Il faut, justement, c'est peut-être dans ces enceintes-là qu'il faut avoir une réflexion par rapport à ça, en se disant, puisqu'on ne va pas pouvoir créer des écoles avec des modèles qu'on avait depuis 50 ans, comment, avec les nouveaux outils, on va réinventer de A à Z l'école, parce qu'on n'a pas d'autre choix, en fait. Et là-dessus, il va se greffer la réflexion sur l'adéquation à ce que l'entreprise cherche. Voilà, il y a tous ces sujets-là. Mais je pense qu'on va devoir innover, vraiment.
So we're going to have to reinvent schools. Yes, come in, Thiébaut.
Je le fais en français pour le coup. Je vais quand même réagir à la question sur il faut peut-être regarder les pratiques d'enseignement à l'école, en dehors de l'école et à la maison. Là, je m'inscris en faux. Il y a un risque clair d'accroissement des inégalités. Qui va bénéficier des meilleurs enseignements à la maison ? C'est ceux qui ont des parents les mieux éduqués. Je veux dire, on peut très bien, si l'éducation faite par les parents est correcte, qu'elle apprend plein de choses aux enfants, tant mieux. Mais je veux dire, l'éducation en tant que telle, ça reste un projet de société, ça reste un projet collectif. À la Confédération européenne des syndicats et dans le mouvement syndical, on en est convaincu. Il n'y a pas de contradiction à ce qu'on ait des systèmes d'éducation pensés comme des projets collectifs qui répondent à des besoins individuels. Il n'y a pas de contradiction, mais ça doit rester à un projet collectif parce que le vrai risque, c'est de reproduire les inégalités. Et c'est intéressant de regarder comment la neuroscience, aujourd'hui, on n'a pas beaucoup l'occasion de parler de ça, mais je vais me permettre, analyse ces questions-là, d'inégalité en termes d'éducation. En fait, il y a beaucoup de personnes qui travaillent dans la neuroscience qui se rendent compte que les conditions de vie, les conditions sociales ont un impact très fort dans les inégalités scolaires. Pourquoi ? Parce que parfois la pauvreté ou les conditions de vie dans lesquelles on vit réduit la concentration de matière grise biologiquement qu'on peut avoir dans le cerveau. Et parfois, selon les différences de niveau de vie, on peut avoir jusqu'à 30% de différence de concentration de matière grise dans le cerveau. Ce qui prouve que là encore, selon la famille dans laquelle on a grandi, selon le milieu dans lequel on a grandi, on peut, si on se réfère uniquement à une éducation qui serait basée sur ces foyers-là, reproduire ces inégalités, les nourrir encore plus. Et ce qui est intéressant, là encore, quand on écoute les gens qui travaillent dans la neuroscience, c'est qu'ils travaillent sur des outils qui, dans le cadre de l'éducation collective, peuvent permettre de répondre à des besoins individuels et de combattre ces inégalités, pour à la fin arriver au même résultat, c'est-à-dire d'éduquer tout le monde, mais avec des méthodes qui sont adaptées à chacun, mais dans un cadre collectif toujours, parce que c'est un projet de société.
Clémentine? Clémentine, I'm going to give you the difficult job of responding to that. Homeschooling as a potential pitfall that could reinforce inequality. What are your views on that?
Well, I have to say that I support very much what Thiébaut said. And I mean, the issue of inequalities, when we speak about inequalities in education, when we speak about employment for young people, we should start with education, actually, because indeed, we see that the way, also like the society is evolving, is really like increasing inequalities and increasing the differences between like young people that are like the most vulnerable ones and the ones that are like the most privileged ones. And even, so we speak about work, but we speak about the society in general. And it's really interesting to see that like the evolution of the society into like more digitalization, for example, and we're speaking about sharing economy. We are like also, I think, we are like owing less and less things, for example, as young people. With this kind of platform economies, we are like encouraged to share more and more, for example. It's not necessary anymore to own a car or to buy a car, for instance. You go and you can like, you can rent one for like a day for like 1 hour, for instance. But then there's no more like a redistribution of capital when we go into this direction, because, for example, the ones that already have, they have already these goods. But the ones that don't have, then with this kind of economy, we share more and more in a way which is good, but then what kind of redistribution, can exist if we don't, and we don't like capitalize and we don't buy anymore, because this is not the way now the economy is functioning as well.
So I'm going to ask you to take your thing off your microphone, but I think the point that you raise, again, is very important. Salonie, I want to bring you in. I know that you started off by saying that we just need to perhaps explore a little bit more around the homeschooling question, but there's another issue around education that is being raised with regards to inequality and potentially deepening that inequality, and that's access. So if you look at, for example, some economies where young people, South Africa is another example, are literally protesting just to get into university because the cost of education, whether it's universities or vocational training colleges, is way too high. If we're going to reinvent schools, like Ammin is saying, how do we reinvent higher education so that we're not repeating patterns of inequality that we're being cautioned to look out for?
How do we reinvent higher education?
Yeah. It's a big question. It's a very big question. But if you had to go back to your higher education experience, what do you think we would need to change so that there's more people who, if they wanted higher education, would be able to access it?
I'm going to speak a little personally here, I think. I have been very privileged when it comes to accessing higher education because I had the fallback option. But do you mind actually if I turn this to another direction? Because I was thinking of inequalities and collective bargaining, and I think that's something we need to talk about a bit more. When I'm thinking of friends back at home who've had privileges, had access to higher education, they earn a good salary. They live at home with their parents, which is the norm in India. They have a circle of friends, they go out on holidays. Why should they care about collective bargaining? I don't know, this is kind of really on another different tangent. But
so I love the fact that you've thrown a question to the panel, and maybe let's get some of your fellow panelists to actually respond to it. Why should they care about collective bargaining? I mean,
j'aimerais quand même rebondir sur ce qui a été dit juste avant. Je suis totalement d'accord avec ce qui vient d'être dit sur la question de l'éducation et de ne pas accroître les inégalités. Alors, que va-t-il se passer ? Je suis dans un secteur où vous avez ce qu'on appelle des start-up, qui essayent de disrupter, je ne sais pas comment on dit ça en français, disrupt les marchés. Dès qu'il y a trop de marge dans la banque, vous avez une start-up qui vient contester ces marges-là. C'est dans la banque, dans l'automobile. Et on a parlé du coup des universités. Ne vous inquiétez pas, vous aurez des start-up. On appelle ça ce qu'on appelle la EdTech, qui va venir effectivement et discuter le fait qu'une université coûte 20 000, 30 000, 50 000 euros pour éventuellement une prestation qui n'est peut-être pas aussi bonne qu'un organisme privé pourrait le faire. Et un des gros enjeux, notamment sur la question africaine, je reviens là-dessus, c'est que le secteur éducatif pourrait être une des plus grandes start-up des années qui vont venir. Évidemment, ceci pose l'idée que sur ce sujet-là, vous allez avoir des acteurs qui vont venir, hein, des acteurs comme Facebook, comme Google, etc., qui vont mettre des investissements massifs et qui vont peut-être, effectivement, ça va peut-être créer des inégalités, parce que quand on laisse ça au privé, le privé, son intérêt, c'est de faire du profit. Et donc, évidemment, on risque d'aboutir à ces questions-là. Donc, ce que je voulais dire par là, c'est que des organisations comme le BIT et ces organisations internationales, si effectivement elles veulent répondre à ces questions-là, il va falloir investir massivement. Parce qu'en face, il y a du privé. C'est aussi simple que ça, et que les gens, à la fin, ces jeunes, en Afrique du Sud, ils vont regarder, voilà, j'ai une solution X, Y, Z qui m'est proposée, qui ne fonctionne pas trop mal. J'ai une solution plutôt ancienne, qui coûte extrêmement cher, mais qui ne m'a pas prouvé qu'on trouve un emploi avec ça. Effectivement, il va y avoir un choix de consommateur pur. Et on le voit d'ailleurs assez bien avec un exemple, c'est une école qui a été montée par Xavier Niel, qui s'appelle le 42. Le 42, c'est une école qui est à Paris, qui fonctionne extrêmement bien, qui s'exporte aujourd'hui aux États-Unis et un peu partout dans le monde. La particularité de cette école, c'est qu'il n'y a pas de prof. Voilà. Donc on a des modèles qui changent.
And so of course the education issue becomes increasingly complex as we move into the future and into a world where in some economies we have exploding youth populations, and that has to be met with a need. I'm going to take the final question from Slido before we begin to wrap up this conversation. I want to take this question from Andrew. And I really want to bring this question back to you, Clémentine. And the question is, how can we reconcile youth views on international mobility, which is generally favorable in Andrew's view, with emerging barriers to labor migration or mobility? And I'm putting this question to you because you raised the issue of 12-month contracts. That when actually as a young person you're probably looking for a longer term contract that allows you to have that mobility and still live a fairly meaningful life. How would you then respond to Andrew?
Well, as Andrew says, I think like young people are quite favorable to this mobility. So I think to reconcile the views, we would need more like policy coming from like government to try to encourage and make this mobility possible, which is a lot about social security coordination, for instance, as I was mentioning, like regarding benefits, the ability to benefit from the different allowances, and also like the ability to contribute to your pensions, for instance. But I think we should really like use the fact that young people are really like in favor of this mobility to like push for this. I mean, to say, I think young people agree to say that there should be no barriers, you know, and we see, for example, we discussed a bit yesterday as well the issue of young like refugees and young people coming to like to work like in our countries, and we are like quite in favor of this because we like understand this like necessity to go and work abroad, for instance.
Again, I just want to get another view on this as well. Thiébaut, let's bring you in. Young people and wanting to be mobile and wanting to work in other markets. What are the pitfalls and the red flags that we need to keep top of mind in terms of their protection, as Clémentine has raised? But are there other issues that you think we need to keep top of mind?
It will be. Sorry for that. It would be, again, maybe a Europe-centered, but it's clear that look at the workers in the so-called sharing or collaborative economy, the new sectors. They have new realities. But if you look at some movement we have seen in the US, in Europe, in London, in Paris, they have a lot of problems. They are facing problems with their platform, with their online platform. And that's a kind of a good, how do you say, pilot initiative or experience, because sometimes they organize outside the classical trade union movement, but they are using very classical trade union tools. What they want? They have a problem with their wage or their remuneration. They want to bargain with their employer. They organize not demonstration or events, and just to prove that if it's one specific example of the future of work, workers will definitely need to be organized, will definitely need capacity to bargain, to collectively bargain on remuneration, but also on other issues. And this is something where I'm convinced that the labor movement went through 1, 2, 3 industrial revolution. He adapted to it. He also tried to shape the relevant systems like social protection, social rights, to counter the effect of this industrial revolution. I'm quite optimistic that we can, if we choose to do it, adapt and really cope with the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution and the future of work relating to that.
Salonie, your hand is up. You want to get in on this, yeah?
It's also, I think, important to look at young people who may be working out of necessity and maybe not out of opportunity or choice. And they may not have the resources in terms of time or access to engage with unions, to engage with collective bargaining. Do you have, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, of course, an ideal world would see all people being active in the labor movement, but being at least a member of a union and time to time take part in the democratic process of a union, make sure that your voice as an individual is heard on specific issues when it links to your working condition, to your trading rights. What is an example? Your remuneration is something that is, in my opinion, of course, really important. And it's clear that we also have to make sure that our structures, the way we are working as a unions, should also adapt to the reality of the labor market. And it's clear that so far, we are still a strong movement in a lot of countries, but we should look like people in the labor market. And it's the case on gender, it's the case for young people, it's the case on a lot of issues. But what I see is a trade union movement that is really aware of those challenges, and that I see more and more colleagues ready to change.
I'm going to jump in there because I just want a quick input from Ammin on this, because potentially you are, as you work across different continents, you probably have a closer eye to young people who perhaps have the desire to work across markets. What are they most concerned about? If you're going to be moving from Africa and seeking an opportunity in a European market, is it about protection? Is it about your pension and where that sits? What is the biggest thing that is likely on young people's minds as they seek opportunities in other markets?
Alors, il y a une distinction à faire, évidemment. Il y a des jeunes formés, il y a les jeunes non formés. Les jeunes non formés, eux, les migrations, ils les subissent. Ce n'est pas un choix. On ne décide pas de traverser un désert et de traverser la Méditerranée. Ça, on va dire, c'est ceux qui sont non formés, qui n'ont pas les possibilités. Par contre, quand vous êtes formé, il n'y a pas de problème. On vous accueille avec bras ouverts. On essaie de vous attirer dans la Silicon Valley. Il y a des Nigérians qui vont aujourd'hui travailler dans la Silicon Valley, des Kenyans, etc. Franchement, aucun problème. Quand le marché a besoin de vous, alors là, il est particulièrement attentif à ce que vous ayez les meilleures conditions de travail possibles. Et d'ailleurs, de ce point de vue-là, je pense que dans la relation entre entreprise et syndicat, qui a toujours été vue en opposition. Là, ce n'est pas du tout le cas. Je pense que l'entreprise doit travailler avec les syndicats parce que dans la guerre des talents, il faut s'assurer que la personne ait envie de venir et trouve les conditions de travail qui soient bonnes avec tous les critères que l'on a dit. Autrement, la personne va chercher un boulot ailleurs parce qu'elle n'a pas de problème. Et particulièrement en Afrique, où est-ce qu'on a, on a une tension énorme sur tout ce qui est middle management forcé, formé. Aujourd'hui, quand vous êtes un bon manager et que vous êtes reconnu comme tel sur un marché africain, des propositions d'emploi, vous en avez 10. Hein. Donc la mobilité, il n'y a pas de problème. Donc il y a une vraie distinction entre ceux qui subissent la migration et ceux qui finalement vont la vivre assez bien, assez facilement.
So I think the panel, thank you very much for that. I mean, the panel has put some really big issues on the table. I'm going to ask a final question that only requires a phrase at best from each of you as we wrap up. What are you most concerned about and what are you most excited about moving forward? If you were to look forward into the next 10 years, looking at the workplace as a young person personally, what are you most excited about? What are you most concerned about? And literally, a word on each side, at most a phrase on each side. Clémentine, I'm going to start with you. What are you most excited about? What are you most concerned about?
Well, clearly I'm the most concerned with inequalities because I don't see like anything evolving on this. And I think we're speaking about digitalization now, but I think changes have been like happening since like many years already. We were discussing this and the situation of young people and these inequalities have been rising for quite a long term, and digitalization is not going to help if we don't put any like concrete measures to like go against this. And what I'm the most exciting is, I would say, still like the number of opportunities that is like given still to young people. And I have to say that young people are, I mean, we didn't like say it a lot during this panel, I think, but are exciting and are the first ones to use actually like this new opportunities of digitalization. And we have to take this as a chance. I mean, it's like, it's great that some jobs we don't have to do, some job that used to be like really like hard to do, kind of.
So we're concerned about inequality, but equally excited about the new jobs that are going to be emerging and the opportunities those are going to throw up for young people. I mean, what concerns you, what excites you? Very briefly, a sentence on each side.
Alors, les jeunes, c'est maintenant et c'est aussi demain. Moi, ce qui me passionne, c'est le sujet qu'on travaille aujourd'hui, c'est comment on change le monde. Certains pensent que changer le monde, ça consiste à envoyer avec SpaceX des gens sur Mars pour satisfaire quelques happy few. D'autres pensent que c'est parce qu'on a un sèche-cheveux que l'on connecte à sa tablette. Bon, pourquoi pas, c'est intellectuellement intéressant. Vraiment, je trouve ça intellectuellement intéressant. Moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est comment on fait pour adresser aujourd'hui des produits, des services, une sécurité, une éducation, en utilisant nos métiers, la technologie, à bientôt 4 milliards de personnes sur le continent africain, mais dans les pays émergents. Je pense que c'est là que la clé se trouve, parce que là, on adresse un marché exceptionnel et qui nous concerne. Et je dis juste une chose, c'est pas, il nous concerne à tel point, par exemple, et je vais faire extrêmement court, la question de l'écologie africaine, c'est une question qui nous concerne tous. C'est pas une question qui concerne les Africains. Si les Africains se mettent à consommer comme on consomme nous, on est tous morts. Donc il y a vraiment, on est interdépendants les uns des autres. Right. Voilà.
All right, so a huge focus on the leveraging of technology in emerging markets and African markets in particular. Thank you for that. Thiébaut, I'm going to give you the challenge. Very briefly, a phrase on each side. What are you excited about? What are you most concerned about? Very briefly.
Alors, ce sera plus simple d'être plus bref en français. Bien sûr, je suis inquiet, comme tout le monde, de la situation un peu partout dans le monde qu'on voit émerger, et cette tentation parfois de suivre des solutions un peu trop simples proposées par ces hommes forts, parce que malheureusement, en plus, c'est des hommes, cette espèce de tentation à revenir sur des solutions simples proposées par ces dirigeants qui viseraient à tout résoudre par un pouvoir exercé seul. Ça, c'est une tentation qui m'inquiète, d'autant plus que ce qu'ils proposent ne répond absolument pas à ce qui nourrit parfois leur pouvoir, c'est-à-dire les inégalités ou d'autres problèmes. Ça, c'est quelque chose qui m'inquiète. Et en même temps, et c'est peut-être une solution à cette inquiétude-là, on voit plein de volontés d'agir et de faire, d'innover un peu partout, sur tous les domaines. Moi, je le vois dans le domaine syndical par rapport à ces nouveaux secteurs du numérique, des plateformes, des initiatives qui naissent, qui se créent. Je le vois sur la question du numérique. Effectivement, c'est aussi une opportunité de consommer peut-être moins d'énergie, de pouvoir s'éduquer différemment. Voilà, il y a plein de projets qui naissent un peu partout et je pense qu'en germe, il y a les solutions à nos inquiétudes plus globales sur l'avenir du monde.
And there goes French as the language that can be brief. So on that note, but thank you for that contribution. I think that's 1 to English, 0 to French. So, Salonie.
At least it's the language where you can, cheat when you say you will be brief, but in fact you will not.
Absolutely, totally agree with you. Salonie, very briefly, what are you excited about and what are you most concerned about?
I'm concerned about inclusion, issues of inclusion, including all people in the world of work. I'm also concerned about the effects of climate change. I think that's something we did not discuss. Maybe we should have time. Concerned about climate change and what the effects of that will be on the world of work. What I'm excited about is, as a young person, going into research and finding solutions for these concerns.
Absolutely, and we're going to bring in the climate change conversation in the sessions that are coming in, but certainly the point is taken. Thank you very much to my panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, the youth perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, a quick announcement. We are, my understanding is that we are taking a tea break and we are convening at 11:15. I'm looking at Karen for a nod. Thank you very much. We will be kicking off the next panel sharply at 11:15, kindly requesting you to be back. Thank you so much.